Hello everybody, welcome students. This is the first of 4 talks on the topic of poverty that I'm uploading. This talk has been designed for students of Gävle University in Sweden and also my own students in Vechta. Swedish students, I was going to meet you this month and the trip had to be cancelled, so this series of video talks is my nice way of making up for that. Hope you enjoy it. The format of these videos is the same in each case. I'll be presenting, I'll be firing questions at you, and my idea is that you're watching this on your laptop, but on your smartphone you're Skyping with a mate, and I'll be asking you questions. Feel free to pause when I ask those questions, have a natter, have a discussion with your friend, and then you can go back to my presentation and click on play again when you're satisfied that you've got some kind of consensus around my question, around, in this case, my definitions. Because definitions is the theme for the first of these presentations. In the next 10 minutes, I want to think about defining lots of key poverty and inequality concepts. Coming up shortly. First of all, though, it's lovely to start with the etymology. I'm not even sure if that word etymology is clear. Hey, pause and discuss it with your friend. Unpausing. Because I'm also a language teacher, I like this word. When I define etymology, I normally say it's the history of the word in our language. Where did that word come from? Which other words in other languages did that word come from? So I always find the question of etymology a fascinating one. So my next question for you to scratch your heads over, what is the etymology of words such as poor, poverty, and pauper? Have a think about that one. Any guesses? I'm guessing you may have come to the answer quite easily because you speak other languages. If you speak a Romance language like French or Spanish, you can easily guess that these words go back to the Latin. I can draw your attention to a lovely online resource. One of my favorite websites is this one, the Online Etymology Dictionary. I always assumed using it that it was done by a whole team of linguist experts. Actually, it's not. It really is a work of passion, information collected by one particular passionate individual. So we can check it out, and it's very helpful. Pauper, according to this dictionary, means poor, not wealthy. And it comes from pre-Latin pauperus, producing little, getting little. Isn't that interesting? We had other words for that in the English language in the past. So if you go back, say, 800 years, you would have had a different Old English word for poor. It's nice for me to ask you, any guesses what that one was? And this is really easy for the German students. Any guesses? The Old English word for poor was, something like arm, which is also the modern German word for poor, excuse me. And poverty itself is, of course, Armut. I understand that's also a Swedish word. So our investigation of the etymology is interesting and fun. But let's move on now to the definitions. How can we define poverty? So again, my first bigger task for you guys, together in pairs, think of how we might define poor. What would our definition be? Try to come up with a short definition, poor, in 1 or 2 sentences. What did you come up with? Well, I was very lazy. To look for some basic definitions, I looked in the usual places. I was born in Britain, so my first instincts are always to turn to my Oxford dictionaries. And the first one I looked in was my Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, which is a really nice book. And it gave us poor, having little money, not having enough money for basic needs. My standard Oxford English Dictionary gives me a slightly different definition. Have a look at this. Poor, lacking sufficient money to live at a standard considered comfortable or normal in society. So my next question for you to scratch your heads over, are these 2 definitions the same? Are these variants of the same definition? Pause the video here. I'm guessing you'll have guessed they're not, but really are differences between those definitions which are significant and important. And the essence of this is 2 interesting concepts which I'm guessing you've already come across. You might have heard about the 2 different poverty concepts, absolute poverty and relative poverty. What are they? What's the difference between them? Again, I want you to stop here. Think about this question, and for inspiration, maybe you even want to draw on those last 2 Oxford definitions on the last slide. Let me give you some well-known definitions of these two concepts. The first definition comes from this organization. You're seeing their flag, their coat of arms there. What organization is that? I'm guessing you're all guessing that's the United Nations logo. My images from Wikipedia here. And they gave us a wonderful and much cited definition of absolute poverty, which is, I find, very helpful, from the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration. So it's a generation old, it's a generation in the past. What is absolute poverty? A condition characterized by severe deprivation. I'm going to stop here. I have to define that word for you. If I'm deprived, it means I don't have something I need. Okay, so deprivation means that you don't have access to something you need. Severe means strong. So going back to our definition, a condition characterized by severe deprivation of basic human needs, including food, safe drinking water, sanitation facilities. That means possibilities for dirty water to flow away safely, health, shelter, education, and information. They add, it depends not only on income, but also on access to services. Not only on income, but also on access to services. So there you are, a well thought out and interesting definition of absolute poverty. Hang on to that. We're going to look at poverty globally in the course of the next two presentations. So hold on to that idea for now. Good. We'll be coming back to that in a minute. First, I want to give you a basic definition of relative poverty. Once again, there's some definitions which are particularly well cited, and my example is one of these. How could we define relative poverty? Maybe I'll let you pause again and collect your thoughts if you haven't already done so. But the well-cited definition I want to give you is this one from an author called Peter Townsend. This is from 1979, so it's what, 40 years old. I think it's still very relevant today. Have a look at this. Individuals, families, and groups in the population can be said to be in poverty when they lack the resources to obtain the types of diet, meaning nutrition, healthy food, participate in the activities, and have the living conditions and the amenities which are customary, or at least widely encouraged or approved in the societies to which they belong. Once again, there's a couple of words there which I should explain for non-native speakers. Amenities, I think here can be understood as something like services, so access to things in the sense of services. And of course, when Townsend says customary, he simply means typical, customary, typical. So it's all about having the food for diet, participate in the activities, social activities, and having the living conditions and the amenities which are typical in a society. Good. We're going to be using this extensively in my last two talks, where I'm going to be zooming in on the case of the UK. I find this relative poverty concept defined by Townsend here really, really interesting. So we will come back to that. Let's move on. I'm whizzing through the terminology which we all need to be familiar with. My next term is inequality. Once again, thinking of both kinds of poverty in a global north country, such as Sweden or Germany, may lead us to us using this word inequality. Once again, how would you define this concept? What on earth is inequality? Well, I found a really interesting definition which I can give to you now. It's from the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary. Have a look at this. The unfair difference between groups of people in society, when some people have more wealth, status, or opportunities than others. So the unfair difference between groups of people in a society, when some have more wealth, status, or opportunities than others. The inequality term is really, really interesting because it leads to other concepts, and I want to talk about two. We can think about inequality within one particular country. So think of your country, Germany, Sweden, the UK, whatever. Think of your country. We note that within one single country, the rich in that country seem to have much, much more resources than the poor in that country. And we talk about this as being social inequality. Social inequality, thinking about a particular place, a particular region, when the rich in that place, in that society, have more resources than the poor. Don't confuse this with a slightly different concept. The second concept I want to compare this with, what about the inequalities between countries? Okay, so we're sitting in our home country or the country where we're living. We're looking at other countries, countries we travel to, and we notice that some of them are much richer or much poorer than our own country. So thinking about the inequalities between countries, we get the idea of global inequality. So to make it clear, two quite separate concepts here. It's worth noting though, these concepts and the discourses around them, they can overlap. Okay, so social inequality within a country can overlap with global inequalities. I think an interesting question is when, for example, pause here, can you think of a time when the social inequality within a country is related to global inequalities itself? Can you come up with anything? Did you come up with anything? I immediately thought of one interesting example, migration. Now, a lot of migration is related to people wanting to leave a very poor place and going to a place which is a bit more affluent. That's a natural thing to want to do. So migrants often come from poorer countries and settle in richer countries. This is an example of global inequalities. But when a migrant arrives in their new country, they may find themselves being disadvantaged in various ways. Maybe because they don't speak the language like a native speaker, or because of their differing religion or ethnicity, they're discriminated against. And you'll often notice statistically that migrants really do suffer in poverty statistics. It really is painful to see. In other words, migration is in part caused by global inequalities, but when the migrant arrives in their new country, they're a victim of social inequalities. And that's just one example. I'm sure we can find other examples when these two concepts kind of interact with each other. Let's move on. A few moments ago, I was talking about poverty, about absolute poverty. Later on, I'm going to give you some statistics. So it's an interesting question. Can we measure poverty? Can we measure absolute poverty? Let's remind ourselves of the definition we had a few moments ago. We said poverty was a condition characterized by severe deprivation of basic human needs, including food, shelter, and so on. I think I actually listed 7 in the original. But would this be measured in money terms? You know, think of a poor place, a poor country. Think of a poor country, maybe in Africa or Asia. How much cash do I need to get that food and shelter and the other things that the UN are thinking about when they define poverty? Any guesses? Well, there are some numbers about. Economists, the World Bank, for example, try to put a figure on this, and I think it's still up to date today. I'm just talking in 2020. Numbers like $1.90 are often cited, $1.90 per person per day. If you earn above that, you're above some kind of basic poverty line. Now, this takes us to my next question. What do you think? Is it right, is it correct and proper to reduce our poverty considerations to money numbers? You know, is this only about money? You know, is this number really, really helpful? Again, think about that. Scratch your heads. I don't think it is. And a short answer would be, think back to the full version of that UN definition I gave you a few slides ago. In that definition, we noted that this isn't only about buying basic things, it's about access to services. Now, some of the services which the UN listed in their definition are quite hard to access in some places, regardless of how much money you have. So if you are living in a very deprived community, you may not have access to tap water or to good education. And actually, all the money in the world won't help you buy that easily. So it's worth noting that these numbers given by organizations such as the World Bank are helpful, but we must be mindful of their limitations. It is a mistake to reduce these statistics simply to numbers. I'm coming to the end of this introductory talk now. You've got an exercise. I'm giving you some photos to look at. So this is handout number 1. You're going to see some photos. illustrating life in developing countries and emerging economies. Which countries might be the images taken in? Lots of my students are remarkably good at actually recognizing countries, in part because they've traveled there or they have friends from those countries. So that's the first question, just for fun. But the more serious question is, which basic human needs do these photos illustrate? So have a look at those photos with your friend and tell me what you think. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I'm coming to a close now. My last words, please note the wonderful resources that we have to find definitions. A lovely thing to do is to look for classic definitions, well-cited definitions, even by people like Townsend's one here, or by organizations like the United Nations. I've also added here the online etymology dictionary website address, also the Oxford English Dictionary, which you can access online. The current address is lexico.com, but it does change from year to year. And finally, UN Term, a really wonderful website collecting terminology, standard definitions from UN or UN affiliated organizations. And I think they even give translations into the main languages there. So there's some fantastic resources out there. I'm going to come to a close now. Hope you've enjoyed the video.